Hello and welcome to this lesson on coordinated responses. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to define what the fight or flight response is, you should be able to explain the effect of adrenaline on tissues of the body, and you should be able to evaluate how a combination of hormonal and neuronal inputs work together to have an effect on parts of the body. So essentially, with coordinated responses, we're talking about how the nervous system and the endocrine system work together to bring about a response. We've done a whole topic looking at the nervous system. We've pretty much done a whole topic looking at the hormone system or the endocrine system. And today we need to think about how they can work in unison to bring about an appropriate response. Now, one response that's brought about by a combination of both the endocrine system and the nervous system is what's known as the fight or flight response, okay? So the fight or flight response. Now, this is a key term, so I've put it in green as always. All key terms and keywords are in green. Now, we can define the fight or flight response as a physiological reaction. A physiological reaction that occurs in response a physiological reaction that occurs in response to a perceived threat to survival. To a perceived, and I need to look how we spell perceived because my spelling isn't the best at times, perceived threat to survival. So our definition of a fight or flight response is a physiological reaction that occurs in response to a perceived threat to survival. Now, you've all experienced this fight or flight response in your life. There's a lot of times when you go to cross the road and perhaps you didn't look close enough, you're too busy looking at your phone or talking to your friend, and a car comes whizzing right by you and you step back and go, oh my God, and you stand there for a bit going, and then you get all shaky. You feel like your body's trembling afterwards. There may be a time where if you've got brothers or sisters or somebody at school in particular really annoys you, I hope I never have to this point, but if somebody annoys you, you may start to shake and feel so angry that your heart rate increases, your body shakes, your muscles tense up. These are all examples of fight or flight response. Crossing the road and nearly getting run over is a flight response. You know full well that you can't handle a car hitting you at a speed, so you have to move back. At the same time, a fight response would be towards myself or somebody at school or your brother or sister who's made you very, very angry at times and you want to fight them. Okay? Before we talk about anything, a physiological response. Physiological. So if we're talking about something being physiological, and in terms of adaptations, you can have physiological adaptations, we mean things that take place inside of an organism. So molecules are released, particular chemicals. It's not necessarily something you can see on the outside of the organism. So we can just add an arrow, because I haven't got room, and we can say physiological means it takes place inside the organism. Okay? Now, as we said, at the start of this lesson when we were looking at the learning objectives, and I'm going to put it in red 'cause it's important, it's kind of the whole point of this lesson. It's brought about by a coordinated response from both the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the fight or flight response, and I've put it in red because it's important, remember all key points from my lessons are in red. We can say that the fight or flight response is brought about by a coordinated response from the nervous system and the endocrine system. From the nervous system and endocrine system. So the fight or flight response is brought about by a coordinated response from the nervous system and the endocrine system. What we mean by a coordinated response is that they work together. Both the nervous system and the endocrine system bring about this fight or flight response, okay? Now, the fight or flight response can bring about multiple responses within the organism. So we can say, and let me find an appropriate colour, we'll go this yellowy colour, that the fight or flight response leads to ... We can say increased heart rate, We can say that it brings around greater ventilation. By ventilation, we mean breathing in and out. So somebody experiencing the fight or flight response will breathe in and out more quickly. They will ventilate more. So it can bring around higher ventilation. And ventilation is 1L. Higher ventilation. It can bring around sweating, so increased sweating. It can bring about increased blood pressure. It can bring about the release of what are known as endorphins, which we'll talk about later. So, release of endorphins. In fact, we might talk about them now. So, endorphins, which is a key word. Worst H known to man. Endorphins, a key word, can be defined as hormones or neurotransmitters that reduce the perception of pain. So, hormones / neurotransmitters that reduce perception of pain. Reduce perception of pain. Going back to some fight or flight responses, we can say that you have pupil dilation, so your pupils get bigger. We can say increased blood glucose, so you'll get increased glycogenolysis, so the breakdown of glycogen inside of the muscle and liver. So increased glycogenolysis. You would also get erectopili, which raise hair. Erectopili raise hair. And finally, you will get reduced digestion. Reduced digestion. So we're going to go through each of these. However, I am going to have a swig of water first because I'm choking. The fight or flight response is a physiological reaction that occurs in response to a perceived threat to survival. Physiological means that it takes place inside of the organism. It's not necessarily something that we can see happening, but we can see its effects. The fight or flight response is brought about by a coordinated response from the nervous system and the endocrine system. The fight or flight response leads to an increased heart rate. This increases the amount of glucose delivered to muscle cells inside of the body. So if you increase your heart rate, more blood is pumped around through the blood vessels, therefore more oxygen and glucose is delivered to muscle cells, ready for them to respond. Higher ventilation means you're breathing in and out much more quickly, you're inhaling and exhaling at a greater rate, therefore you are getting more oxygen into your blood, therefore more oxygen can be delivered to your muscle cells, ready to bring about a response. Increased sweating gets rid of excess heat, because if your muscles are intending to do lots of respiration, there can be lots of excess heat generated, so by increasing sweating you get rid of it. Pupil dilation means that your pupils get bigger, allowing more light into your eyes so that you can see more clearly. Increased glycogenolysis means that you are breaking down more glycogen, which is being stored in your muscle and liver cells, so that it can be added to the blood, so that muscle cells have got glucose to carry out respiration. Increased blood pressure, this allows blood to be pushed through the blood vessels at a greater force, therefore allowing more substances to be delivered to and from muscle cells. Release of endorphins, they reduce your perception of pain. Erectopili raise the hairs on your body, therefore getting rid of more heat. And reduced digestion means that your body is taking energy that it would use in digestion and adding it more to your skeletal muscular system so that you can respond more quickly. If ever you've been in any sort of fight or whatnot, I like to think that you don't. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've been in plenty in my time. When you're in the heat of the moment and you're in an actual fight, the endorphins prevent you from feeling pain, so a lot of the times you may be scratched, punched, kicked, whatever. At the time you don't actually feel it, and then later on after the events took place, you have a shower or you sit down and you go, oh, you start to bruise and feel the pain. Endorphins stop you feeling this pain at the time so that you are more likely to survive. It's worth mentioning that these are all fight or flight responses that we have. Okay, I'm not going to write this down on the screen, so you may wish to pause the video after I've said it and write it in your notes. But predators such as dogs, wolves, cats even, do show a fight or flight response, and they show this by showing the teeth. If you've got two dogs that are looking to fight each other, to try and be more dominant, they will show their teeth. They will move their sort of, well, I call them chops. I don't know what I don't know what their actual name is, but they pull their chops back so that you can see their teeth. Their ears go flat and they start to growl. They'll also get the hairs to raise on their body so that they look bigger. So a wolf or a dog will show their teeth, they will growl like that, they'll flatten their ears and their hairs will stand high. This is a fight or flight response. Obviously, when I've been in a fight or flight response, when I've been in a fight, I haven't stood there showing my teeth growling at people, okay? However, it is worth noting that although these are the responses of fight or flight that we have as humans, there are predators that have others, okay? So I'm going to refresh the screen so that we can talk about the next bit. Obviously, this lesson is recorded, so you can go back and rewatch any bit that you are not sure about. Now, people who have PTSD constantly have a fight or flight response. This is due to past experiences. So we often see people who have been in a war zone, usually suffering from PTSD, or people who've had some sort of past trauma. What this means is that their body is constantly in this fight or flight response, and it can lead to serious health conditions. Okay, so I am going to say at the top, because it's worth noting, that people with PTSD constantly have a fight or flight response. Constantly have a fight or flight response due to past trauma which can lead to serious health conditions. I mean, if you think of having high blood pressure all the time, that can lead to things like strokes. It can lead to cardiovascular diseases. If you think of things like lots of glycogenolysis, you can have lots of glucose in the blood all of the time. Even though they haven't eaten much, it can lead to things like diabetes. Okay? Now, before we think about how the fight or flight response is brought about, we need to just define something known as the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic, S-Y-M-P-A-T, H-E-T-I-C, the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? The sympathetic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that accelerates heart rate, constricts blood vessels, and raises blood pressure. Okay? So the sympathetic nervous system can be defined as the part of the nervous system that accelerates heart rate, constricts blood vessels, and raises blood pressure. Okay, so it's the part of the nervous system that accelerates heart rate, constricts blood vessels, and raises blood pressure. Now, just check that we're recording. We are. Now, next lesson, we're going to be talking about what's known as the parasympathetic nervous system, which does the opposite, okay? It slows things down. But in general, the sympathetic nervous system speeds things up. So as a rule of thumb, it's well worth just keeping in mind that sympathetic nervous system speeds things up. So it's worth noting that the sympathetic nervous system speeds things up. Now, the hypothalamus controls this fight or flight response. So everything is coordinated by your hypothalamus. Okay? So we can just say, before I clear the screen, just so I've got space, the hypothalamus is the coordinator in a fight or flight response. So essentially, the endocrine system and the nervous system both follow the instructions of the hypothalamus to bring about this fight or flight response. Okay? So, if I can just clear my screen so that I've got some room. As I said earlier, you can pause the video if you're still writing. It's the beauty of this. However, I am at hand as always for various questions. So we can start. We're going to draw a flow diagram which will take up the whole screen. So you may need about a quarter of a page, maybe even half, so that you can go away and do some independent study, annotating and things like that. So as I said earlier, we always start with the hypothalamus. Okay, we start with the hypothalamus. Now, we're going to be talking about two different sort of parts of the body or systems of the body. We're going to be talking about the nervous system, which I'm going to do in this sort of peachy colour, and I'm going to put a key over here. So, nervous system. And we're also going to be talking about the endocrine system, which I'm going to do in this greeny blue colour. So the endocrine system. Okay? So we'll talk about the nervous system first. So the hypothalamus, to bring about a fight or flight response, will stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? So it will stimulate the sympathetic have I spelled that right? No, I haven't, have I? SYMPAT stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? When it stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, this causes a part of the kidneys known as the adrenal medulla to release adrenaline and noradrenaline. Okay? So we can put that the adrenal medulla the adrenal medulla releases adrenaline and noradrenaline. Okay? Adrenaline and noradrenaline are both hormones. However, it's the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, that causes the adrenal medulla to do this. Okay? It's a bit confusing because people tend to confuse the fact that we're using hormones here. It can't be part of the nervous system. However, it's the stimulation from the sympathetic nervous system that brings about this release. Okay? Now, these, as any other hormone is, are released into the blood. Okay? Now, at the same time as all this taking place, the hypothalamus also stimulates the pituitary, which releases adrenocorticotropic hormone. So the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland, which in turn releases this hormone. So we could say, which releases adreno, ADRENO, adrenocorticotropic, corticotropic hormone. You'll be glad to know that this hormone can be abbreviated as ACTH. Okay, so the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone. This causes the adrenal cortex of the kidneys. So the adrenal cortex releases about 30 other hormones. So it releases about 30 other hormones. Okay? Now, of course, like any other hormone, they're released into the blood so that they can act on their target organs. Now, the hypothalamus stimulates the nervous system, it stimulates the endocrine system, but it also acts directly on other glands. Okay, so over here we can say other glands and smooth muscle. So the hypothalamus also acts directly on glands. It also causes smooth muscle, particularly in blood vessels, to constrict, therefore increasing blood pressure. The hormones act on the blood. The tighter smooth muscle inside of the blood vessels acts on the blood, increasing its pressure. And this overall brings about our fight or flight response. So, fight or flight response. Okay? So we've got this coordinated approach. We've got the hypothalamus stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, which increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, constricts blood vessels, which also causes the adrenal medulla to release adrenaline and noradrenaline. At the same time, the hypothalamus also stimulates the pituitary gland, which causes the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, which then causes the adrenal cortex to release about 30 other hormones. At A level, you don't need to know them in that much detail, you just need to know that others are released, which are also released into the blood. At the same time, other glands are stimulated, smooth muscle in blood vessels constricts, which has an effect on the blood, which brings about a fight or flight response. So if we have a look back to our learning objectives, you should be able to tell me what a fight or flight response is, and you should be able to tell me how the combination of hormonal and neuronal inputs work together to bring about the fight or flight response. Our final bit of this lesson is the second learning objective, the one that says that, can you explain the effect of adrenaline on tissues of the body? Now, adrenaline is this part here. It's released by the adrenal medulla, and it's part of the nervous input of the fight or flight response. I don't know what happened to my voice then. I meant nervous. Okay? If we clear our screen and we turn it back to black, as Amy Winehouse once famously said, you guys are probably far too young for that joke, and we can put our subheading, adrenaline as a first messenger. I am purposely trying to make it very small, so the handwriting's not the best, I apologise. So, just for the sake of this lesson, adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone produced by the adrenal medulla that brings about a fight or flight response. That brings about a fight or flight response. Okay. Now, adrenaline is the first messenger. However, it does utilize a secondary messenger system, something that we spoke about a few lessons ago. So it utilizes a secondary messenger system. Okay. So there's a few substances we need to talk about. You've got your phospholipid bilayer. We've got a receptor, which we're going to draw like this. We've got the rest of our phospholipid bilayer. So that's the phospholipid bilayer, PB, stands for phospholipid bilayer, not peanut butter. We've got our receptor. And we've got adrenaline, which I'm going to do in this orange colour. Okay. As well as all these, do need to add, apologies, I might need to get rid of peanut butter or phospholipid bilayer. As well as all these, we've got an internal protein known as adrenal cyclase, and we can start by saying that, number one, the binding of adrenaline to the receptor in the cell membrane causes the production of CIMP. CIMP is a molecule we spoke about last lesson, I think it was, and it's a common secondary messenger molecule. If you're not sure of what CIMP is, I strongly suggest you go and look at last lesson. It stands for cyclic, let me get this right, it's basically monophosphate. So cyclic, I've gone blank, adenosine monophosphate, that's it. So cyclic adenosine monophosphate. When adrenaline binds to a receptor, an adrenaline receptor complex is formed. So we can say that, number two, the adrenaline receptor complex causes adrenal cyclase it's not adrenal, it's adenal, sorry. Adenal, it doesn't have an R. Adenal cyclase to bind to it, making CAMP from ATP. Adrenal cyclase to bind to it, forming CIMP. Oh, we didn't use that colour, did we? The OCD inside me will not let me use it. So forming CIMP from ATP. Now, if I show you what this would look like, so we would have our receptor again. I'll draw the phospholipid bilayer in a moment because I'm not sure how much room I'm going to have. Because adrenaline is bound to it, this is our adrenaline receptor complex. This would cause, got our phospholipid bilayer, this would cause adrenal cyclase to bend round and to join to the receptor. This causes ATP to be converted into CIMP. Okay, so this is our adrenaline receptor complex because we've got the adrenaline bound to the receptor. So adrenaline dash receptor complex. So when adrenaline binds to the receptor, it forms this adrenaline receptor complex. This forces adenyl cyclase to join to the adrenaline receptor complex, which converts ATP into CIMP. CIMP then goes off and acts as a secondary messenger. It activates enzymes. Okay? So it will go off and activate enzymes. If you think back to what we spoke about last lesson or a few lessons ago, this brings about a cascade. Okay? So we can say that CIMP, number 3, CIMP causes reactions in the cell, causes reactions in the cell, which could be things like vasoconstriction or vasodilation. So, such as vasoconstriction in the gut, remember, we get reduced digestion, so vasoconstriction in the gut will reduce the amount of digestion, or vasodilation in the muscles, which can increase muscle activity. So adrenaline is a hormone produced by the adrenal medulla that brings about a fight or flight response. This utilizes a secondary messenger system. You get the joining of adrenaline to a receptor, which causes adenyl cyclase to join to the receptor, forming an adrenaline receptor complex. When adenyl cyclase joins to the adrenaline receptor complex, ATP is converted into CIMP inside the cell. This activates enzymes. These enzymes can bring about things like vasoconstriction in the gut or vasodilation in the muscles. These essentially bring about a fight or flight response. So, you should now be able to define what a fight or flight response is. You should be able to explain the effect of adrenaline on the tissues of the body, and you should be able to evaluate how a combination of hormonal and neuronal inputs work together to have an effect on parts of the body. Should you have any questions about today's lesson, please email me or contact me via Google Classrooms, and I'll help you out the best I can. Okay? Thank you very much.